it's very interesting, three horizon thinking, because it helps you have a more nuanced conversation around the work that you're doing. And it helped us greatly as a business, because at the moment, probably 70% of our business is in Horizon 1. And the rest is kind of made up, 30% of Horizon 2 and Horizon 3. And for the listeners, Horizon 1 is basically the dominant current system. And there's lots of those around. But there's something within the current system that is flawed, and it will deteriorate. It will decline over time. And Horizon 3 is the future that we want. Like, this is the system, like with Kate Raw, where she's starting to think about donut economics and how we can live within the boundaries of our planetary systems. And Horizon 2, which is the most interesting, is like the disruptors that will take you from 1 to 3. And therefore, you've got things like, I don't know, it could actually be organizations like Extinction Rebellion or movements. It could be just ideas like Anthropocene. It could be natural disasters like floods, and we're going to be facing increasing amounts of those. Things related to polar ice cap melt that are going to affect hundreds of millions of people over the coming years. Those are going to be the Horizon 2 experiences that are going to take us to Horizon 3. And this is very helpful for us to think about, like, where do you want to be as an organization? Are you going to just exist in Horizon 1 because it is in decline? We know this. And do you want to be on the side of the future, or do you want to just be a footnote in history?
You're listening to the Spaceship Earth podcast with me, Dan Burgess. The story of Spaceship Earth is simple. We live on a life-giving rock called Earth, hurtling through space. Like a spaceship, we have a finite amount of supplies with an intelligent operating system called nature, which keeps everything replenished as long as we all respect it and participate wisely. In this podcast, I'm in conversation with folk involved in regenerating life, shifting consciousness and reimagining how we can live more beautifully and peacefully. I talk with artists, writers, activists, designers, adventurers, healers, farmers, creative mavericks, and more. Their stories invite us to participate in the co-creation of life-sustaining cultures, in service to life, becoming crew on Spaceship Earth.
Greetings, Earthling. Welcome to the Spaceship Earth podcast. This is Dan, your host. Thanks for tuning in. Welcome aboard. If you're new here, we really hope you enjoy this trip. If you're returning, welcome back. We really appreciate your ongoing support of this podcast project. So, did you know the odds of you being alive is roughly 1 in 400 trillion, apparently? You are a miracle. I am a miracle. Today, I have strangely encountered a whole range of young fledgling birds. A song thrush, a buzzard, a jay, and a green woodpecker. All born this year, all miracles. As is all life on this rock called Earth hurtling through space. Because it's not a given that we're all here. That this planet Earth creates the conditions for life to emerge and thrive, for us to find home here. Life is a miraculous, emergent, unfolding, improbable, unknowable sequence of cosmic collisions, interactions and entangled relationships. Life on this spaceship Earth is sacred. What if this spell of modernity, its excessiveness, extractiveness, its passivity, its logic of separation that has established this civilization on top of this great mystery of aliveness was actually a glitch in our evolutionary consciousness, resulting in a collective hallucination of certainty, control, and hubris. A delusion of human-centered dominance and separation from all that is alive. As my friend Ella Saltmarsh reminded me last night on one of our gatherings, in the Anthropocene, it is the systems, not the species, that are innately destructive. And these systems have been designed by us humans, mostly in the imaginations of our very recent ancestors, with ways of thinking, seeing and relating to life on this spaceship Earth that are destructive and divisive. And now we know. We can learn to see and relate to life differently, to see ourselves, each other and this more than human planet once again with awe and wonder, to relate in ways that are Earth-centric, life-centric, life-affirming, in kinship with all life, imbued with deep wisdom instead of industrial cleverness, to learn compatibility and harmony with the interconnected, complex, intelligent operating system on spaceship Earth. And so, what if we're all being invited to step into this challenge, into service in these times of great unravelling? Especially those of us with more privilege. For example, those of us in the global north who've been flying business class on spaceship Earth for far too long. There is more responsibility for us to cultivate the courage and creativity to begin to change the ways we've been showing up. If you're listening to this podcast, that probably means you, as just being able to listen to podcasts puts us in the minority percentage on this spaceship with the time and mental capacity to consider these challenges. There is a responsibility we all have to the next generations, to our fellow human beings who are suffering right now, and to our more than human family, past, present and future ancestors. In this podcast, I have hosted conversations with many humans who are taking responsibility to change the way they think, see, relate and act through their own unique gifts and web of influence. I've hosted authors, farmers, healers, activists, musicians, artists, but it's been a while since I've had someone working deeply within the world of business and, in his words, the dark and magical art of brands. My guest on this episode, David Johnstone, is in my view a beautiful example of a human taking responsibility and using their gifts, experience and influence to cultivate the courage and creativity to face into the uncomfortable questions, to speak up to the messy contradictions of this moment, to raise awareness of the massive changes coming down the line, to experiment with weirder moves and to keep self-examining not just the impacts of business as usual, but to imagine and participate in business unusual, where we begin the messy process of healing, reconnecting, reimagining and liberating. He is founder, CEO and executive creative director of global design studio Accept and Proceed. He's host of the brilliant podcast Endless Vital Activity. He's convener of strange solstice gatherings, we don't know what it is yet, on Hackney Marshes. David is a humble, curious, insightful, creative human, a radical experimenter with a big heart and infectious imagination. This was a wide-ranging conversation exploring his work in brand design, his journey working with global corporations, the awakening to the impacts of commercial creativity, of taking responsibility for the impacts we're making through these creative human entities we call brands. This has led to the Design for the Future mission of Accept and Proceed, which he unpacks alongside an exploration of brand power, the dark ages of the future, the emergence of new forms of business, death, mystery, and a whole new relational entanglement between humans, enterprise, and this living, mysterious spaceship Earth we call home. I really enjoyed this conversation with David. I hope you receive something from this too. If you do, maybe you could share it with a friend, post it on your socials, leave us some feedback, and if you're really feeling it, contribute to the ongoing production of this podcast by flipping to a paid subscription on our Substack at becomingcrew.substack.com. For the price of a pint of beer or 2 takeaway coffees a month, we'd be most grateful. Okay, let's cut to it. This is the Spaceship Earth podcast with David Johnstone. Enjoy.
You're listening to the Spaceship Earth podcast with my dad, Dan Burgess.
David, welcome to the Spaceship Earth podcast.
Thank you, Dan. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Well, listen, whereabouts are you on Spaceship Earth right now, and how are you showing up in this moment today?
Well, where I am is on the corner of Downs Park in Accept and Proceed headquarters, which is quite a grand title, isn't it, for the office of the design studio that I founded and helped run. And it's with only mild pangs of guilt that I admit that I was very happy to duck out of our board meeting about half an hour ago and come and join you. Not because I don't enjoy my board meetings, but I get one of those a month, and this is a one-off, and I've really been looking forward to it. So thank you genuinely for inviting me on. I respect what you do greatly. And yeah, like I say, I've kind of learned a lot from the way that you create the conversations, the texture and the context that you bring to them through the way you sort of craft them. So thank you, genuinely. It's an honor to be here. The showing up thing is always tricky, It's hard for me to describe. I always feel sort of light and dark simultaneously and everything in between. And it was interesting, in the meeting I've just come out of, our creative director, who was in Paris yesterday, described this city that's getting ready for guests. That kind of feeling when you're buzzing around and getting excited and people are coming, because of the Olympics, Paris kind of feels like that. They're planting new plants, and it kind of feels like it's all being spruced up. But there's this nervous energy that he described, and I could relate to it because I always feel in a sense of that kind of nervous energy. And I wonder if that's because we can all sense something's coming and we don't know quite what it is. And we hope it's good, but we don't know. And that nervous energy is probably how I'm showing up, if I'm completely honest.
Beautiful. Thank you for those words. Both of how you're showing up, but also just for the podcast. It's lovely to hear that. And I would throw in, I've been very much enjoying your podcasts of late, and I want to speak to some of that, particularly how you are, showing up and how you're bringing exactly these kinds of feelings, I guess, into the conversations you're having, which is very much for me sort of like I guess where I'm always trying to sort of work from is like, what we're kind of feeling and sensing in these times through our lives and the work that we're doing and the places that we find ourselves on this spaceship Earth. And I've been kicking off this year, which I guess you're starting to gesture towards in what you've just shared. But I guess, really, again, understanding like what is it that we're experiencing? What are the kind of, I use this term vibes, and, I guess it's just like, if you think about what you're experiencing, your grounded experience of what you're sensing is going on, how would you describe those kind of vibes right now?
Yeah, I think it's light and dark as well. I should just say it's my son's birthday today, and I had a lot of joy waking up this morning. He was so kind of anxious and excited going to bed last night. He just couldn't sleep. He was like, I can't sleep. And he's 8 today. So a very happy birthday, Tom.
Hey.
And I think the vibes, I find it weirdly reassuring to think that we're living through the dark ages of the future. And I think that, I'm always exploring new things and trying to sort of learn, I guess, new ways of thinking, new stories that help inform the way I see the world. And one that's really resonated with me is this philosophy or idea, really, of panpsychism. And panpsychism is the idea that everything is conscious. And it really resonated with me because I've long kind of felt that we don't fully connect with even other humans' consciousnesses very well, let alone the beautiful animals and all of the other things that we're entangled with. And I've long felt that, definitely many animals are very conscious, very aware, very feeling. They're all feeling this kind of light and dark emotion that I feel. We are animals at the end of the day. I'm a modern primate. And even just preparing for this podcast, like not many generations ago, I would have been very happy to be, scampering around in the fields with you and building tree houses or just exploring like new bits of nature. And we just would have seen ourselves in a different sort of relationship to the world. And I've always felt that everything is conscious. Panpsychism basically says that everything is conscious. It's a different type of consciousness. So a rock is conscious, a plant is conscious. And I'm pretty sure of that. Like Venus flytraps can count, and if you could see the slow growth of a mountain, kind of coming into being and then reducing, it's just a different consciousness and in a different time frame. So we sort of dismiss it, but it's all there. We're not separate from these things. And I suppose with that in mind, the planet is conscious and we are not separate from it. And that's becoming ever more evident because of the cause and effect of our actions on the world. And I think with the dissolving of our individual egos comes this kind of awareness that I love the idea of a conscious planet, like a brain, and there's all these different functions going on in the brain. And if that's the case, then individually we're kind of like neurons firing around the brain. And if any part of the brain is in distress, then we're all going to feel that. And therefore, of course, when I feel anxious or there's nervous energy, I think that's what it is, and I sense it in other people. And it's because there's acute distress going on in certain parts of our planet at the moment. And whether you look away, you still feel it. You still are kind of part of this entangled conscious brain. So I suppose all of that said, I suppose it's kind of reassuring to me to think that we're living through the dark ages of the future only because I feel like this is all necessary. This kind of breaking down in order for us to kind of raise our awareness, to treat the birds and the bees and the flowers differently, be conscious of them as necessary and not be dominant over them. And it all has to fall apart in order for it to re-emerge. And I think that's the vibe I'm getting. We're sort of in this mushy breakdown to re-emerge. And I suppose the area I play in all of that is the cognitive processing of our global brain. And that's really the way I see brand and communications and the work that we do.
Wow, it's beautiful. I love that. I could feel that as you were talking, feel that connection to that kind of, I guess the fact that we can, if we allow ourselves to, if we're in the position, I think, to open up to that, we can feel all this, we can sense it, we can feel it, we can see that pain and conflict over there is felt inside us. It's all destruction of this living world around us. We can feel it, and I think the more we allow ourselves to sort of sense that or open up to that, the more we begin to understand that entanglement that you're speaking to. Clearly, you've been asking, uncomfortable questions. I would call them uncomfortable questions, and for me, they are essential questions. But in the culture, or the culture that's coming apart now, it's hard to bring the uncomfortable stuff in. And so I've always seen you, from what I can see, as being very willing to bring the difficult conversation, open up the uncomfortable questions, but also because you can sense that there's a lot that we can, if we can move through the uncomfort, there's all kinds of possibilities. And I see that in your work, and I was just really curious, really, to sort of work from that place. I guess as I've got a bit of history in your industry, and spent a good probably decade, I guess, into design research and then brand and communications, and became a bit of an agitator in my sort of last sort of core years in that space. And I recognize also that it takes quite a lot of courage to sort of speak up to these things and to sort of acknowledge our responsibility and to open up these difficult conversations. And so I guess that's I see this as this, whether we want to, there's all kinds of frames for this time, aren't they?
the end of one part of history. It might be the great turning, the great unraveling, as Joanna Macy would say, or this shifting away from this industrial society towards something that might be life-sustaining, life-affirming, life-centric, in right relationship, however you want to frame it. And you have this line, I think, design for the future is at least I see with accept and proceed. And I'm curious if we can maybe, in the spirit of that, for this conversation, just to sort of work from that place of, what is ending, what could be becoming. That's the context for the chat I'd love to have. And I guess for listeners, I wonder, how you've got to this place of design for the future, and maybe there's a little bit of context and backstory you can just give listeners to give them a sense of why this is alive for you. What is this idea about? How did you get to this point?
I suppose I was very aware that I fell very willingly headfirst into the full worship of the material world at quite an early age. And there was something about brands that I just found so incredibly fascinating and enticing. I couldn't put my finger on it, but there was something important, I think, in the way that this dark art of brand world was able to influence behavior to the point where I would beg, steal or borrow to get that next pair of Nikes, or and it was, like I say, it was unapologetic. It was brazen. Like, when I really think about the David I am now, I'm just it's a different worldview I have, but you kind of got to go through it in order to be able to retrospectively kind of look at what's actually been happening in some cases. And I suppose falling head over heels in love with brand worlds, loving not just the brands themselves, not like identity systems, although I do appreciate and always have the craft of them, but the kind of surrounding magic, the frequency they emit, the wider spectrum of what they're putting out into the world and what they do achieve, but what they have the potential to achieve. And I suppose with that in mind, I didn't articulate it like that in my younger years, obviously, but with that in mind, I started pursuing a career in graphic design originally. And through the course of my career, I studied at a college called Hereford College of Art and Design, which was in Hereford, obviously. And then I went on to Central St. Martin's, which told you on day one of that course that you are now at the center of the graphic design universe. Lots of hyperbole like that. And then you wouldn't see anyone for 2 weeks, where you had to go and scurry off and do your work and then come back together. And it was really a college that made you learn on your own sort of inquiry. And yeah, I think, graduating from there, focusing on concepts, starting to understand the commercial side as well, going into a career in the early days where I worked for various different brands. And then, the brand I mentioned a second ago, Nike, I worked in-house for them at their European headquarters for a number of years in Hilversum, which is outside Amsterdam. And all the while through this process, I was learning what I just now describe as that dark art, that magical art. And then I became really good at it. I became really good at being able to convince people that you should aspire to this thing, or you should, crave it, or use it to achieve the business goals that the brief required. And then I set up an agency, and the agency was kind of exploring the overlap between the art that I'd experienced in smaller agencies, very instinctive, very intuitive, it feels right, let's do it. And that can work very, very well. And I'd also experienced big brand world. I worked at Interbrand Newell and Sorrell, as it was known at the time, and kind of learned the kind of science that's required around brand world when a lot of money's involved. But let's be honest, a lot of that intuition and instinct can get kicked out and make for pretty dreary work. And with that overlap in mind, I kind of set up Accept and Proceed, and a few other things in mind, like I don't like working for other people, and can't kind of go on like this. And I kind of, with a leap of faith and nothing but a month's wages in the bank, I leapt into, the wide world and started to realize what it is to break out of a monthly wage, and actually this sort of more animalistic way of being that I'd recommend to anyone who has the stomach for it. Like, you don't have to live the way they tell us to live. You can go out and hunt and gather and be responsible for your own destiny. And that's what I did. And I found quite quickly that I could earn far more than I'd ever earned before in a regular wage. And that perception of security that you have in a full-time job is often just an illusion. You're at the mercy of somebody else's decisions rather than your own. And over time, I guess I've built the agency, and I've kind of become not that free entity I was in the beginning anymore. I'm beholden to it, as we all are, but we do have this spirit of independence that's always been there. But somewhere along the line, I realized that the drivers of what we were doing were not good, and this dark art that's very, very powerful comes with a responsibility, as you say. You have to be asking what you're doing, what it's hoping to achieve, and who you're doing it for. And that's the kind of conversation we have on a regular basis here, and it's informed so much of the evolution of what Design for the Future has now become. And the joy of creation was never the problem. I've always known that just feels right. It is right. We're humans. We're all creative at our core, and I think we need to kind of open ourselves up to that. But when you become very proficient at creativity that others want to pay you for, I suppose you need to ask why. What are they hoping to achieve with that magical gift you've developed or have been given? And Design for the Future came from a recognition of the role and the responsibility of the work that we do, the questioning of the drivers, and the understanding of the cause and effect as much as you can. You can never see it all, but starting to ask, what is going to be the effect of this activity on the world? And that's where Design for the Future came from. It's really our promise to the world. But when you have a promise to the world like Design for the Future, you have to think about the future that you're actually trying to create. What are we designing for? And so when we landed on this promise to the world of Design for the Future, it then quite quickly had to follow with the description of that world, which we call a together world. And the together world is a beautiful statement. It was actually landed upon by our head of strategy, Shawnee. And as great strategists do, she kind of managed to take something very, very big and create this razor sharp, diamond of a statement. And in a together world, if you start to unpack it, it's kind of fractal. You think it can apply to so many different things, almost every conversation, almost every relationship, almost every piece of work. And it can inform greatly the type of ideas and concepts we come up with and the thinking around the impact we want to have through them. So we've got what we call basically these 5 shifts towards a together world and 5 states of togetherness. And I won't go into them hugely, but I'll just name them as the 5 states of interbeing, reciprocity, resilience, healing, and liberation. Those are what we have gathered as 5 states of togetherness that we want to work with. And I suppose if we were just to touch on a couple of them, interbeing, for example, is for us a movement or a shift from humans seeing themselves as separate to humans that are reconnected into nature and each other. And if we think of healing, we move from a neglect of lost causes to a deep care for damage and trauma. And then just one more, in terms of resilience, we move from systems unfit for the future to systems that can help us through the challenges ahead. And when you've got those 5 states of togetherness, what you can do is work with them in terms of the work we produce, but you can also measure the impact of that work over time. So we can see, have we achieved into being through this work, or healing, or resilience, or reciprocity, or liberation? And that really forms our impact strategy. So our impact strategy means that Design for the Future is not just a positioning, it's something that actually activates the way that we show up in the world, and something that we both reflect on and assess over time to see if we're actually achieving a more together world through Design for the Future.
There are 2 stories on Spaceship Earth, a passenger story and a crew story. The passenger story is based on extraction, transaction, and distraction, and it's leading us towards collapse. The crew story is based on connection, cooperation, and participation.
it leads towards regeneration.
You're listening to the Spaceship Earth podcast with my dad, Dan Burgess.
Whew. That was a lot, wasn't it, Dan? I hope that's okay.
I love that, and it's making me think a lot of things. And I guess this question of something I'm really curious about in and exploring quite a lot in my own inquiries and on the pod and through the work we're trying to do with Becoming Crew, which is again much more about, I guess, this idea of, futures are created through what we do in the moment. Like this kind of like, we're sort of like shifting, there's our imaginal capacities, the imaginal realms that we have to pull on to think, well, how do we heal all this stuff? How do we relate in new ways? All those 5 principles that you've just set out, and then they require in some ways a relational shift, right? This need to start becoming these things in order for these intentions to manifest in the work we're doing, whether it's with our clients, whether it's with our communities or whatever. And so I guess I'm really curious about, and my sense is like, I'm jumping it a little bit here, but I've always like absolutely been brilliantly curious about your gatherings that you're doing around things like the sort of Earth cycle. I think you call them, we don't know what this is yet, those things, but that for me is a kind of a relational experiment, which we can dig more into. But I'd love to know, like, how does this relational aspect, or does it show up in how you're trying to manifest this design for the future vision? And then I'd love us to so maybe that's you as accept and proceed, but then I'd also love to get into how you are starting to explore this within some of your client work, and whether you could share anything about how this type of shift is starting to happen or not, and that context of bringing this type of, because you could say, I mean, for me, this is beautiful, and it's radical in the truest sense of getting to the root. That's the root of the etymology of the word. It's to the root. So this is getting to the root of a lot of the problems. But what you're bumping up against, trying to bring this stuff into the, maybe let's say this highly commercialized world, which we recognize is coming apart, is ossifying in many places. So yeah, does that make sense?
Maybe I should start the other way around in terms of the work that we're doing. I suppose I should say immediately that, like, part of our business model, if you like, right from day one, was that we would experiment. And that began with something called the light calendars, which actually was a piece of work which represented the amount of light and dark for the year ahead back in 2006. I designed that with our creative director, who's still with us, Stephen Heath, when I was just sitting in my basement flat alone with nothing but notions of grandeur and like a list of made up email addresses to pretend I had people to work with at Accept and Proceed. And like, I was like, I need to put something out into the world. And it was essentially a data visualization. And it was interesting because that piece of work ran for 10 years. Didn't know that to begin with, but it became a rite of passage that new designers coming into the studio would explore essentially the same data on sunrise and sunset. And that culminated in an exhibition in Shoreditch in a warehouse in 2016. And we've ran an art gallery for 5 years, and I suppose I've always personally been interested in exploring through different things. So we'll kind of get onto that part. But I just wanted, so it's not so abstract for people, I wanted to explain the commercial part of Accept and Proceed and those partnerships that you talk about. So to give context to brand, the world of brand, I want to be clear that it's brand with a capital B. It's not branding. It's not like just identity systems, although that is a component part of what we do. But brand is something that touches every single part of a business. Brand touches products, services, offerings, HR, operations. Like every single part of a business is affected by brand, because when a global organization goes through a global rebrand, as we're working on at the moment, you recognize that it fundamentally changes the way that they see themselves and the way that they communicate with the world around them. And it's powerful stuff, because what you're dealing with is culture, and that old adage of culture can eat strategy for breakfast. What you're actually dealing with there is people. A company is not a company, it's a collection of people. And if you affect the culture of a business, it can fundamentally change the way that it thinks and operates in the world. So I don't see any separation between brand with a capital B and business with a capital B. They're basically the same thing. So some might think, like, how much change can you actually bring through brand strategy? Well, I think quite a lot, actually, if you think about the way that it can fundamentally change business. But you can't do that with every single business. There has to be an understanding of brand with a capital B and an aspiration to understand that you can use that in order to affect both culture and the way that you operate. And the way, so that's kind of like, I guess, a practical description of why I think the power of brand can affect business. But there's also this sort of unseen part that I tuned into at a very early age, the kind of frequency of brand. And like, we don't ever question the power of a piece of art. We go to a gallery and we might stand with a Rothko or like just experience something that's literally giving us goosebumps. And why is that? It's not the exact effects of the blending of colors on a piece of canvas or whatever it might be. I think we're picking up on the frequency of the mind that created that thing. And therefore, I that kind of idea that everything is energy, like that's a massive unlock for me. When you start to realize everything's energy, you start to recognize that you can witness your own emotions and you can change your own emotions and you can witness the emotions of another person and see how yours are affecting them. I think our shared friend Bayo Akamalofe, Mr. May Your Path Be Rough, he talks about this idea that we're sort of in continual exchange. We don't have relationships, we are in relationship continually. That was a statement he made that I absolutely love, another fractal statement. And when you start to see brands as energy, like some will dispute this. I'm starting to go from like practical descriptions into something that's a little bit more poetic and philosophical, but this is my truth. I see that brands are frequencies that can change the world. And when you think about a frequency that a brand can actually carry, and you think of the power of a brand like, say, the swastika, like think of that brand, that emblem, that single emblem that seems to literally carry with it a kind of energy of fear and terror. And like, what kind of dark art is that? And especially the fact that was inverted from the original intent of that mark, which was love. And I don't think it's just through repetition or association. I think it's because the mark itself is charged up with the dark intentions, the organization that used it. And then you think about other marks like CND that seem to carry with them, the energy of peace, or more recently Extinction Rebellion, which it's easy to forget are only, a handful of years old. But when I very first saw that mark, the Extinction Rebellion mark on a sticker on a lamppost in East London, I text my colleague and I was like, what is this?
Power to the people. Power to the people. The people got the power. The people got the power. Tell me, can you feel it? Tell me, can you feel it? Getting stronger by the hour. Getting stronger by the hour.
And they said, yeah, I've seen it too. I don't know, it's something. And I could feel the energy of the founders and their intentions of Extinction Rebellion before I understood what it was. We are reading a lot more from things if we open ourselves out to it. That's what I'm trying to say. So when you think about that, then a branding exercise comes with a huge amount of responsibility. Is it being charged up with the true founding principles of your organization or your intention or what you hope to achieve in the world? Because it is far more than just an identity system. It carries with it a wider spectrum of energy. And I don't say all that to our partners and our clients. I just talk about the effects on culture and like the first part of what I've just described. But I do think it's good to be aware of all of it simultaneously when you're working on things. I suppose to answer the part around what we're butting up against, the until we could get the business case like married up with our aspirations, it was very hard to convert the types of projects that I was doing when I was way back when at Interbrand. You know, there I worked on things like the Winter Olympics and automotive like brand, global rebrands and all kinds of different things actually. But there's so much money tied up in it, they rationalize everything. And therefore, and it's usually to achieve, in those days, it was very traditional business metrics, but now those are present. And until you can say, look, you face an existential threat if you don't fundamentally rethink who and what you are in the world. The statistic is that 78% of all businesses that are currently listed on the NASDAQ, if they were to properly account for sustainability and environmental factors into their product, service or offering, they would be unviable. That means 78% of everything around us has to change. So there's kind of a requirement to think about, can we continue to make our money at point of purchase? Can we think more holistically around what we actually hope to achieve in the world and monetize it through different ways through our community? There's lots of interesting experiments, I suppose, going on in that sphere. But if you're a business founded more than 15 years ago that's product-based and, you know, seasonal and cyclical, it's very hard to break out of that. So you start to butt up against things where you're like, okay, yes, you're right. Yes, the landscape's changing. Yes, we as a business face an existential threat, but we only came to you for a global rebrand in order to achieve what we hope is an uplift in revenue and a geographical focus and maybe a gender focus. Just for example, those are the kinds of things traditional like business cases make in their brief for a global rebrand. So we're like, look, you need to achieve all these other things, and this is what you need to be thinking about. It's not a 5-year plan, it's a 50-year plan, and we need to be evolving, you know, to the future. And I butt up against sometimes CEOs or CMOs going, you're right, but nah, we can't be sure. You haven't got the track records, and we're not sure you can achieve what are the fundamental component parts of this brief. You know, so I suppose that was something that we learned this year. Like really rationalize the business case. Make sure you've got the fundamental parts. This is not a moral argument. It is just something that has to have a commercial component to it. And what supports all of this very helpfully is the Three Horizon, which you may be aware of. Three Horizons, yeah.
Bill Sharp, isn't it? Bill Sharp?
Exactly, Bill. It is Bill Sharp, and more recently Kate Raworth, who, like, basically for those listening, it's very interesting Three Horizon thinking because it helps you have a more nuanced conversation around the work that you're doing, and it helped us greatly as a business because at the moment, probably 70% of our business is in Horizon 1. And the rest is kind of made up 30% of Horizon 2 and Horizon 3. And for the listeners, Horizon 1 is basically the dominant current system. And there's lots of those around. But there's something within the current system that is flawed and it will deteriorate. It will decline over time. And Horizon 3 is the future that we want. Like this is the system, like with Kate Raworth, she's starting to think about donut economics and how we can live within the boundaries of our planetary systems. And Horizon 2, which is the most interesting, is like the disruptors that will take you from 1 to 3. And therefore, you've got things like, I don't know, it could actually be organizations like Extinction Rebellion or movements. It could be just ideas like Anthropocene. It could be natural disasters like floods, you know, and we're going to be facing increasing amounts of those. Things related to polar ice cap melt that are going to affect hundreds of millions of people over the coming years. Those are going to be the Horizon 2 experiences that are going to take us to Horizon 3. And this is very helpful for us to think about, like, where do you want to be as an organization? Are you going to just exist in Horizon 1 because it is in decline? We know this. And do you want to be on the side of the future? Or do you want to just be a footnote in history? I don't speak that bravely directly to many of our partners, but it's kind of implicit in a lot of the way that we think and present ourselves. And it also reassures us that we can do work in Horizon 1, and that doesn't conflict our positioning of design for the future. It's actually logical, and it'd be irresponsible to jump too far forward because it's very hard to make money there. But we're bridging, and over time we will have a wider percentage of people that kind of work in the other horizons coming to us for different types of work.
I'm just so happy you're speaking to this because this was sort of my intuition of wanting to chat to you, David, on many times. There's so much need for us to be sharing this kind of thinking, right? Because we're stuck. We are very stuck, is my perception of the systems, the kind of modernity, the kind of consensus is very stuck. It's very binary in its view. There's a lot of fear about opening up to the unknowable side of what's going on. Again, for me, this is like nutrients. It's fertilizer. It helps more people consider the complexity, the need to have lots of different ideas, lots of different ways of perceiving what's going on. And for me, it's part of this whatever we're experiencing and going through now, this great turning, this transformation, is to normalize the complexity and to normalize the fact that we don't know, and to normalize that we've got models that we're sort of working with and playing with. And for me, that's just vital to how we kind of open this up and accelerate these shifts. And something, I was listening to one of your podcasts you did at Design Week in Milan, and I really appreciated your you were using the two loops model, the kind of hospicing of how systems begin to decay and break down. This is how life works, and again, how we can start to understand that businesses and structures and institutions are exactly the same. They don't go on forever. As much as we want to hold on to that, they reach their, as everything does, they come towards a period of ending, particularly if they've been constructed on a growth philosophy. Then of course they can't continue. And for me, again, it's very helpful to start thinking of things in that way. Businesses, business models, our kind of identities as consumers moving into something different, whether that's citizens or whatever it might be. We call it becoming crew here, but there's something very helpful, I think, about speaking to that. And what I really appreciated on the conversation I listened to you is that you were putting that kind of death ending provocation into the conversation. And what I noted as well was that there was because there was some quite optimistic stuff. Again, I don't have a problem with optimism, but there was, for me, I don't know who it was, but they were talking about sort of 25 years of opportunity and stuff. And I was like, well, that's felt a little bit uncomfortable for me, because it was kind of like, yes, and there's going to be a lot of things that need to die, right? Not just businesses and sectors, but stories and beliefs and behaviors and identities. Loads of stuff is going to require a kind of an ending, a letting go. And actually, we are faced with a choice, I think, of either paying attention to that and trying to cultivate that kind of humility and openness, and what you were speaking to in your principles of, and solidarity and all of these things, to recognize that endings are a critical part of what the future could become. And actually, if we pay attention to those endings at every level, and we learn to sort of support them and honor what these things have also achieved and created, whether that's businesses or structures or systems or people or behaviors, but also pay attention to that ending in terms of, the hospicing, the composting, what can come through that. I think it's very useful to have these models and to open them up, to speak to them, to get them out there, right? Because I think a lot of this is uncomfort, isn't it? It's kind of like, if you're in business and you're a CMO or, there's a hell of a lot of pressure on you. You're working within a system that you've inherited, which has been the norm for the last few decades, which in your heart probably is coming apart, yet you're still rewarded by it. You're still evaluated by it. You're still receiving your identity in some ways is based on keeping that thing going. So it does require this humility and openness and experimentation.
I think these are very powerful things to think about, as well as every empire must fall. As far as we're aware, the first to ever use brand guidelines that have been documented were the ancient Egyptians 6,000 years ago. And they were the ones that basically standardized brand systems in their hieroglyphics. So they had a standardized like ratio between torso and leg, and like they would have depicting different pharaohs. So there would be very specific ways of representing the profile and all these kind of things. Like, so they were very advanced 6,000 years ago. It's mad to think that brand guidelines like all that time ago. And while we don't know everything that was going on in the minds of the ancient Egyptians, it could be said that like they were the seeds of the worship of material world that we're now experiencing, like almost the kind of ultimate kind of end point of. I'm not a historian, so I don't say that with absolute confidence, but it kind of feels right to me. The way that they worship the material world and were buried with their material goods and artifacts, it feels like we're kind of at this weird, gloopy end point of that. And so this idea of things, models like Two-Loop Story, which again are a story, just like the word atom, this idea, we've analysed it, it's scientific of course, but we give it a name and then you give it a story, and that's how our minds work, that's how humans work. And you can argue whether like humans are good at their heart, or whether they're bad, some of them, or whether they're sort of nothing but the product of their environment. But I do know that stories change the way we see ourselves and the world around us. And therefore, things like Two Loops are very, very helpful. And the horizon, the three horizons, kind of profile. And then you start to think, well, what role does brand play in that whole storytelling activity? And then things like B Corporation, which, like everything, it's kind of fraught with issues, B Corporation. And you wonder the kind of weird high barrier they have to access, because you have to dedicate, we basically paid someone's wage 3 to 4 months just to get accredited. Not every business can afford to do that. So you've got this weird high barrier for certain businesses, but then this low barrier because certain businesses are able to become kind of accredited without really considering that cause and effect, the scope 3, the relationships they have with externalities, which actually make them definitely not a B Corporation, but it's only assessed based on kind of their direct operations. So not to diss B Corp, but like we need to kind of push a little bit further than that. But what I love about this kind of idea of B Corporation as a piece of technology, a brand technology that can change the world, is that you never rest on your laurels. So we accredited first year, I think it was a score of 84. And the deal with B Corporation is that you can't stop there. Every single year you need to improve on your score or you're out. So we're now at something like 111, and very proud to be so, but we can't stop there. We must move forward. And I think that's a very powerful way of seeing the change that brand can bring in the world and business can bring in the world. You basically affect every single access point that you've got. And that's what we need, to recognize that businesses are entangled with each other and they can affect each other in positive ways to be able to progress humanity, really. And that's all about storytelling as far as I'm concerned.
Do you, because, we're quite very, again, story is something we spend a lot of time thinking about on the podcast, and particularly seeing stories as a relational thing. We sort of we begin to carry stories that are informed by how we relate to something. And so I guess, is there a story particularly that you are really trying to dismantle with the work you're doing? Is there a story you're really trying to birth and grow through this work?
I'd probably go back to the together world. This is really what we're trying to bring about, and that, I suppose, it's interesting, isn't it? The book Sapiens, if anyone's read it, basically culminates in one simple narrative, I suppose, or trend that it could be described as, of humanity coming together. When you look back through our evolution over thousands of generations, there is this trend of us coming together, and it doesn't feel like that, but in that is the turmoil of the coming togetherness, I suppose. We need to come together. We know this. We need a global identity. We need to stop seeing these illusionary boundaries between countries or each other in order to be able to actually live on this spaceship Earth in a coherent and sustainable way, I suppose. And all the turmoil could be kind of moving there. And that's why I was so incredibly disappointed with Brexit, because in Europe, we had this idea that there could be single identities that coexisted under one banner. It was like a micro version of what I think the planet needs to do, and I hope genuinely we are moving towards. And I suppose there's this sort of the together world is just something that we think about in terms of the work we do with brands and businesses and ourselves. You know, so as an agency, we co-define our next 12 months every spring. So we go, sometimes if we've got the money, somewhere very special, as we did one year, hire out a stately home in the north of England and go and spend 3 days getting pampered and thinking and exploring. That was a special year. But yeah, even if it's in our own studio, we spend time thinking about what we're doing here and what we're trying to do and how we need collaboration, diversity of thought, and really to work together as a team in order to be able to co-define our future. We moved together. Recently, we explored through movement. We did something called New Patterns, which you'll be able to see on our Instagram, and there's a dedicated portal to it. And it's introducing movement into the process of design. Humans do fundamental things. We eat, we move, we love, we breathe. Like, these are all things that we explore as a team together. We've done breath work with Stuart Sandeman. We've done movement with Will Brown. I interviewed actually Hannah Jones a couple of weeks ago, which is an episode coming out next month on endless vital activity, and it nearly made me cry. It was a very beautiful conversation with her. But it's really starting to look at the fundamental things that we do as humans. And I suppose we're not dismantling anything. We're just exploring these areas. We're starting to think about how can we use our work, our platform, our partnerships, our conversations, in order to be able to move towards an ever more together world. That's our overarching narrative and story, I suppose.
Yeah, and I love that. And tell me a bit about the gathering for sunrises, because I love all that. I mean, we do with Becoming Crew, we host an open gathering on that kind of earth wheel, so it's sort of 8 times a year. But I love this kind of stuff.
Yeah, is beautifully named by the poet, my friend Thomas Sharp, but it was born out of actually a kind of fluey vision that I had, and it was because, I don't know, there was a very specific spot on the Hackney Marshes that I had this kind of not quite asleep, not quite awake, but kind of aware of both. I had this vision of people gathering there and watching the sunrise. And I told Thomas about it, and he said, you have to make this happen. And I was like, do I? Right, okay. And then we got together, a small group of people, actually some of the founders of Extinction Rebellion and Stuart Sandeman, who I mentioned earlier, who's another friend, Radio 1 DJ and breathwork expert as well. And we just went down onto this spot in Hackney Marshes, and we stood there and we thought about, was that a special spot and why? And it seems to be special because this is a word I've recently learned and I love, that it's kind of within the ecotone of the city and nature. The ecotone is basically the blend between things, and it can be a graphic device, it can be like a gradient, but it can also be a transition. So a sunrise is in itself an ecotone. And when you stand in the particular spot that we've been gathering for over a year now, you are very aware of the city, the metropolis of London, and the sounds, as well as the kind of presence of the dawn chorus. And it's a very special moment because you know that you're kind of at the intersection of these two things, and there isn't any boundary, and they overlap, and that we are entangled between the two things. And I think that might be why the particular location was calling me. I suppose there's a lot to say about the sunrise gatherings, and there's also nothing at all. It's just a micro community gathering with, we don't know what for or will happen yet, but each time something seems to happen. For thousands of generations, we have been gathering to watch the sunrise. There's something very special about our relationship with our star. And you sometimes get disconnected from that in the metropolis. And there's this thing called ideasthesia, which actually Julian, who works on our podcast, he runs Bison at the end of London Fields. Very, very, if anyone wants to record anything, go to Bison and Julian. But he told me about this idea, Thasia, which he'd assumed everybody had, which is basically systems that kind of organize time in your mind. So it's visuals of systems. So Julian actually visualizes his position in the week. It's always present. And his position in the month and the month's position in the year. And he just assumed that everybody could see that. It's a very specific system that he's drawn for me. And it's a very beautiful thing. And I don't see my time in the week, month and year like that. In fact, I sometimes have to really consciously orientate myself to it's spring or it's summer. And for me, the sunrise gatherings have actually really made me pay attention to the seasons and really helped remind me that this is the passing of another cycle round our sun. And when you start to do that, you start to have that incredible macro-micro experience more and more often. Like this idea that we are on a spaceship, this planet Earth. I love it in many ways because you kind of realize that this planet is in this massive expanse. It's incredibly intricate, and you can be forgiven for thinking that it's all that exists, but it definitely is not. And, if you start to zoom out to the scale of just witnessing a bubble in a lemonade, but a bubble in a lemonade that's very flat because there's not many other bubbles around for millions of miles. And you start to actually go, oh my God, this is incredible. The wonders of the universe, the wonders of what it is to be a human. And if there's anything we're moving towards, I hope it's this raise in consciousness that's expanding our awareness of who and what we are, the energies that are present in things like brand and so much more, the way that we can actually use those. I think that's what's happening with humans. We are, as far as we know it, the highest form of consciousness, and I use that very carefully because actually I'm not 100% sure we are. But we are a heightened form of consciousness as far as we understand it. And the game, the role, the job we have to do, I think, is to elevate, expand, enhance. And anything you can do to do that, I think that's really why we're here as humans. And for me, the sunrise gatherings, as simple as they are, they're incredibly profound because I think they're bound up in all of that, the awareness of the truth of who and what we are. And magical things happen in those micro communities. Like just last one, this wonderful woman called Jane, at the end of the gathering, just felt called to assemble sticks in a certain pattern on the ground, which in itself felt like a weird feel of symbolism and brand. And I don't know whether it was her white witchy skills. Sorry, Jane, I don't know if you identify as a white witch, but it was something going on that was incredibly ceremonial and incredibly ritualistic, and it felt like it was speaking to my heart and my soul when she did it. And I actually ran past it a few days later and I was like, oh my God, that is charged up with something very beautiful. And those kind of things happen. And the more of those kind of things happen, I think it's going to help us evolve our consciousness and move us to where I hope we're going.
Yeah.
We live on a life-giving rock called Earth, hurtling through space. How bonkers is that? You're listening to the Spaceship Earth podcast.
If you'd like to support the running of the Spaceship Earth podcast, head over to our Substack and sign up. You'll get every episode straight to your inbox, weekly writing, plus other crew offerings. We're grateful for whatever you can give. Join us at becomingcrew.substack.com.
Yeah, no, I love that. And, it's kind of why I was just curious, because for me, what I'm experiencing is exactly the more that we allow ourselves to experiment in other ways of knowing, other ways of thinking, other ways of being, opening ourselves up to other forms of intelligence beyond just what we have in our minds. All of this feels kind of essential, I think, that point of that consciousness shift that you're talking to. And I would argue with all the extraordinary things that humanity has achieved, I think we have, accelerated ourselves in some way, disconnected from so much intelligence that's available to us in other ways and other forms, and which I think our not so long ago ancestors kind of knew. And I think our indigenous brothers and sisters have always known. And I think I think the kind of modern human, in some ways, with all the connectivity that we've created, I feel there is this disconnection that's been occurring. And so I'm really curious about, again, and maybe bringing it back into this world of brand and business. Are you, because for me, like if we're going to be creating these new organizings, these new ways of building business and relationships between people, my sense is we're going to need lots of other intelligence that's not just in our heads as modern humans, in order to feel that we are, that we are seeding something in this big long transition that is beyond our lifetimes, that we're seeding in other forms of knowing and thinking and being, and other forms of intelligence that are available to us with practice and with humility and with connecting and disciplining ourselves to go, no, this is what we need to be doing. We need to be opening up our traditional ways of making sense, the ways that we might have made decisions, opening up decision making. This year, myself and my fellow co-creators of Becoming Crew, which is we're offering out these different what we call unlearning experiences. But we've been, a couple of things last year were very much, a couple of big decisions we made were very much informed by more than human intelligence. We had an experience on a river down in the Dart where we were really taking these questions, and we all received something that helped us make a big decision about our offering, our work into the world. I guess that's an example, but I love, when you're speaking to this stuff, this just, again, for me, that's what my heart starts opening, because if I was dreaming about where this stuff can go, it would involve these kinds of ways of doing things. Are you starting to bring these kinds of ways of showing up, ways of knowing, ways of decision making, ways of creating into the work you're doing?
Well, from a personal perspective, I'm definitely bringing that into the way I try and operate. Actually, a good friend of mine, but an incredible coach called Alistair Gray, who actually, he was my coach for a while, and then I did his coaching course. So I'm an accredited coach, believe it or not. I did the Mindful Talent coaching course and found it very powerful. And I love the premise of coaching, because when I first started coaching with Alistair, I didn't know what it was. And I was like, is this therapy? It feels kind of therapeutic. And he described the difference between therapy and coaching, which is, therapy assumes there's a prior sort of fracture that needs to be solved or healed in some way. Whereas coaching starts from the here and now and looks forward and assumes you're perfect, assumes you have everything within you. And it's just kind of almost kind of emerged or kind of coaxed out through this powerful process of listening and deep questioning. And Alistair, the other day I was kind of working with him because I'd been experiencing a few moments where I got quite overwhelmed in certain situations, and I could feel the energy like rising into my chest and then into my head, to the point where I'd get fog, and then I'd feel like I wasn't making sense anymore and I wouldn't be able to actually kind of achieve anything that I'd hoped to in either that meeting or conversation. It was in relation to a specific, relationship. And he took me through a practice. It was only 15 minutes, but he took me through a practice of actually visualizing the energy coming up within myself. And I could literally see it in my chest and kind of into my head. And he said, no, observe it as if it's a flower in the garden. And there was something about him asking me to do that actually allowed me to kind of see not myself as separate from it, but see myself as observing it. And I suddenly experienced it as a pansy, a dark pansy, like black, purple pansy, and I rubbed my face on it. And it suddenly became this dark, heavy, but kind of weirdly friendly energy. And as I did that, it dissipated. It sort of atomized and became a blue energy. And because I'd been through the experience of actually feeling that emotion of kind of distress, I suppose, and anger, I felt then really like tired almost immediately. And I had to describe the whole process to him as I was going through it. And I suddenly felt like I was kind of bobbing around on the waves. And then as we were finishing, he said, is there anything this energy wants to say to you? And I waited, and it said to me, just chill out and we can have some fun. And I was like, oh my God, I can actually work with my own energies and my own emotions through this visualization practice in meetings, in relationships in a completely different way. It felt like a total expansion of my consciousness in that 15 minutes with Alistair. So if anyone wants to work with him, give him a call. He's incredible. And I suppose that's an example of that kind of, I don't know, what I felt was like this kind of swirling sacred energy of intelligence that I hadn't been aware of before, which is myself, but not myself. And I'm in communication with it, and I tuned into it in that moment, and I will continue to explore that. And it will definitely help the way that I operate as a human within both the home and work life, which isn't really any separation, the human as I show up. There's something about the sunrise gatherings that I think is going to play an important role in our business in the future. Will we introduce a relationship to the cycles of nature into our business over time? I don't know. I'm allowing it to percolate over here. And I often find it's like things that work outside of the system, the fringe, those are the things, I suppose they're the Horizon 3 things that are percolating that then get like catapulted into Horizon 1 through Horizon 2. And when they take off, they just take off. They just absolutely like change everything, and it can happen very, very quickly. So I don't know exactly what's happening with sunrise gatherings yet, and I don't need to know, but it will create something that's going to emerge. And yeah, in terms of our project process, we're constantly playing with those types of things, processes that are kind of a little bit fringe, I suppose, but they seem very powerful because of it.
Beautiful. Can you, I was thinking like, going back to this kind of imaginal realm, now you're on, this mission that you're working with, design for the future. And I'm wondering could you give us a glimpse of the future that you're imagining? What kind of brands might we see? Is that a question? Is that a fair question to ask? Like what will be happening a decade down the line, let's say? What's happened? What's changing? What might we be bumping into in terms of brands? What's the sort of, I'd love that if you could speak to a little bit about this, how you're imagining this all playing out in the future.
I might go a bit further than 10 years. And I think first of all, they won't be called brands anymore. So like the etymology of the word brand it means to fire burn cattle, or worse, humans. There's no getting away from that kind of origin of what it was. Exactly. Thank you for branding me there, Dan. And by doing that, I've become yours in some way. Like, it's a weird thought exercise when you actually wear a brand that symbolizes a certain thing. You should think about what you're actually doing there. Are you a walking advert, or are you in some way owned or co-opted by that brand? Like, these are things, young David fell in love with and then started to unpack through his life. And they won't be called brands anymore because I don't think they will be symbols of like aspiration. I think these systems will become not communication systems, but conversation systems. They'll be, as Bayo says, like we don't have relationships, we're in relationship, and the brands will be like the relationship devices between communities and organizations. And in doing so, they will unlock the full power of those communities. They won't see any separation, and therefore they'll be kind of amplified in their potential through it. And the kind of world, I suppose I can't help but be drawn back to the marshes, and like, where do I see those sunrise gatherings in maybe 50 years from now? Well, I think it's turned into like a kind of marshy Burning Man, sorry, Hackney Council on the local community. I do not intend to start a big never-ending rave on the marshes, or maybe I do. But I think this kind of idea that actually I really loved about certainly the early stages of Burning Man, that it was like people coming together to cross-pollinate and skill share and like intel share and start to think about how societies of the future will actually operate and how we can get there. The greatest philosophers and artists and scientists all coming together to share. Like, I love that. And if our sunrise gatherings turn into that, then I will be very, very happy. And I suppose the role that like brands play in all of that, like they're almost the conduits between all of those exchanges. They're not driven by any single aspiration to increase revenue. It's more about a kind of strengthening of communication through community and through kind of citizen exchange. And I know you're friends with John Alexander, and I love the work that he does, and I love him. And he's omnipresent, isn't he? He's always everywhere, like pictured with his book everywhere in the planet all at once. The man is like a force of nature. And actually, it was an unlock for me, because it was like you know, I kind of see my kind of role in brand has changed. You evolved into activism, and I'm using kind of brand in the same way. I'm using it as an access point, but sometimes you can't get to where we need to get to through like activism. It's like the starting of a conversation. It's the raising of awareness, but how much is it going to achieve over time? You need to evolve the conversation, which is why XR evolving into different component parts like hard art is so fascinating. And all of this is moving towards something that is described around like citizenship and fellowship and, you know, kind of humans are in exchange. And the world I hope for the future is that we truly see ourselves as the incredible multitudes that we are. And all of these kind of labels that we give ourselves, which in some ways are quite helpful, but in some ways could never capture the truth of who we are. You know, I'm a man, but I'm so much more. I'm a brother, I'm a father, I'm a husband. I'm very proud to be all of those things, but none of them actually capture the truth of what David is, which is a wonder of the universe. And so are you, Dan. And the moment we start seeing each other like that, I reckon we'll all be down on the marshes just dancing the whole time in a blissful state of, like, I hope we're moving towards that. I hope we're genuinely moving towards that. And I know it's a cringy cliche, but I think that's kind of where heaven and earth can kind of become one. We can bring the two together. Yeah, and the role that brand will play then, I just think it's all going to be part of this recognition that everything's energy, and it's an exchange, and it's in conversation and relationship with everything all at once. It's an entangled activity.
I love that. Thank you for that. And it's just, I mean, I think also sort of teased me up really for this this crew question, but I've always seen, you know, when, you know, my own journeying when I was, you know, working more on kind of campaigning and, you know, more sort of, you know, radical sort of creative collaborations, creative activism, and lots of stuff. And I you know, I eventually, like as we all do, you know, you reach thresholds, transition points in your life, and things go on. But for me, there's always this, you know, what you're speaking to, and this is why we set up this idea, you know, for us, this story of becoming crew. It's like it's where we're all finding our kind of place in this web of life. We're all finding our way back into this understanding that, you know, this idea, the sort of story of the Earth as a spaceship. The spaceship is, you know, it's ecological, it's biological, it's mythological. There's so much we don't know, but actually, the operating system, if you like, on this spaceship is not compatible with a passive story of passengers. This idea of stepping into service, it's finding your way back into this idea of crew, of being in service. And of course, there's this more than human living intelligence that has always been crew. It's always been functioning, doing its thing, whether it's, you know, microbacteria or a bird or a tree or whatever it is. There's this beautiful, you know, individual flavor and diversity that we get, but there is this participation in the greater whole, in the health of the whole, you know. And that's the sort of that's the kind of invitation we love to explore, and this idea of becoming, that we're not, you know, it's ongoing. We're figuring our way into this thing and evolving as maybe life is always doing, and maybe we've forgotten that a little bit as modern humans. We've sort of felt that we've arrived, you know, but actually there's this remembering that we're the babies. We came last in the evolution, and so there's this kind of invitation to step in. So yeah, I guess, I mean, and when you were speaking just then, it's making me think of that, because it's kind of what you're speaking to. But I wonder, this invitation of becoming crew, what's it bringing up for you?
Yeah, thank you for the invitation, first of all, Dan. And I just want to say again, I genuinely love the way you've innovated the format. And because I think having enjoyed so many of the conversations that you've conducted in the past and feeling it's a real honor to be part of this, I also think that there's something around the way that you craft the layers and the texture, within the conversations through actually bringing in sound effects and things that just, it feels very true, because your podcasting was born out of field recordings and radio, and it's become very homogenized. Like you said earlier, like we're getting less comfortable with the discomfort and the context and the realness of the world. We're sort of, I think we need to feel that again. In a world that feels like it's disconnecting from itself, we need to feel the emotions, both good and bad. And that's what you sort of bring through in the way that you kind of layer and give texture and context to the conversation. So I just wanted to thank you. You're 6 years in and just keep going. You're very, very inspiring, all of you. And I'm just very thankful that you exist. It's very kind of brave and necessary and not without a lot of hard work. So on behalf of your entire audience, thank you. What it's bringing up for me is that there's a couple of things, like Buckminster Fuller has always been a huge inspiration. And I sometimes wonder what it would have been like to be around the man. Like I watch old kind of, when he's giving seminars and things, and I'm thinking, did they know what a frickin' genius they were in the midst of? Like this alien intelligence, talk about otherworldly intelligence, that was within the man. And it was just so incredible, really, that he's existed and the world is so much better because of him. And I hope that a lot of his ideas can be realized. He's such a trailblazer. The spaceship Earth, it's not without debate, like this idea, because it's suggesting in some respects that someone's in control. And who's on the bridge, Captain? It's like humans, I don't think, I love the way you frame it up, and it's important to recognize that. But this idea of spaceship Earth, I love it for the reason that it can give that zoomed out effect. We're traveling through the universe. I love that. I think the more we can do that, the better. But the idea that we are the dominant species and can run this thing is delusional. There's so many swirling systems that we are part of that are going to make their presence increasingly known. I think we almost need to release ourselves to that. And that's where I hope things are going on this spaceship Earth. And I might even suggest that a more appropriate way to think about it, with the light of that quote I mentioned earlier about we're not a universe of atoms, we're a universe of stories. Is this not a story machine that we're on? We're traveling through the universe and taking these stories. I think they can be felt around the universe. There's so much research showing that what happens on the micro truly affects the macro. What happens in the quantum realm affects the widest, farthest reaches of our universe. And therefore our thoughts are very important in these moments, these tipping points for humanity. Think about your thoughts, think about the stories that you are engaging with and how they're affecting the way that you act and operate, because I think it is having a profound effect on the job that we're actually here to do.
Beautiful. Thank you for that. Thank you for all of that reflection. Thank you for speaking to what you receive from this podcast as well. It's really lovely to hear. I mean, you podcast, it's quite a funny old thing doing these things. You're never quite sure sometimes what people receive from them, but it's really beautiful to have that. Thank you. I really appreciate that. And I'm with you, completely with you. It's funny, I was captured by Operating Manual for Spaceship Earth back, when I was really in this exploration at sort of 2008, 2009. I'd gone down this climate change rabbit hole. And what I was fascinated with Bucky Fuller on many things, but I was originally just fascinated in that vision of the Earth as a kind of living entity, as a thing that's kind of there. And then what has always been interesting for me is, what is the operating system, right? And I quickly understood that for me it's unknowable, right? It is unknowable. It's like we understand parts of how this thing operates, but it's 4.5 billion years of R&D, so it's beyond what our little minds can make up. So there's something for me in the curiosity of this. Well, how does yeah, actually, what if the crew is this, billions of species and interactions, and what if that is the essence of crew? It's finding the place and serving that place. But I'm with you. I think we are in our structures, and in the kind of structures of power that are obviously unraveling, decaying, ossifying, tightening up in some ways, quite frighteningly. There is a hubrisity of control, of pulling levers, if you like, which is why this time is both sort of, opens up so many possibilities, but also is quite terrifying. I'm going to ask you whether you might leave us with something, and that could be absolutely anything. We often ask, in the spirit of crew, in the spirit of participation, we like to offer the listeners something, which could be a provocation, it could be an invitation. If there was something that you would share, David?
Just because it's had quite a profound effect on me, that visualization of my emotions that I did with Alistair Gray, and I'm keen to continue to explore it. I'd ask everybody to, when they're experiencing an intense emotion, if you can remember to, that's the trick, but if you can remember to, try and observe it like a flower in the garden. Like, just get friendly with it and recognize that it is both part of you and you are separate from it in terms of able to observe it. And in that, there's, I think, a very powerful learning. And I think we can all get on a lot better if we start to recognize really how we're showing up and our relationship with the world and each other. And let's start there. Like, just really, really observe yourself, the emotions you're having, the responses that you're having, the thoughts that you're having. Yeah, go deep into that. That's what I'd love to encourage everybody who's listening to do.
Thank you, David. Like I say, massive kudos for everything you're doing and putting out into the world, and all the experiments and inquiries and the openness and the generosity in your work with your podcast, and the conversations that you are having and sharing. It's all beautiful fertilizer. So I just wanted to say thank you for the time today, and go well.
Thank you. And yeah, if anybody would like to join us on the marshes, every solstice, every equinox, we will be down there at sunrise. And Stan, maybe I'll see you there sometime. But yeah, it really has been a great pleasure. And yeah, who knows where this will go. Yeah, I feel a strong connection with the work you're doing and everything you've said. So it's a real honor to be here today.
Thank you, David.
So, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with David. If you did, you know the score. Maybe you'd like to share the episode with a friend, or post it on your socials and encourage others to check it out. Maybe you'd like to leave some comments or reflections on our Instagram or on the Substack. Drop us an email, hello@thespaceship.earth. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear what this is bringing up. And we'd love it if you could spread the love and seed it out across this spaceship Earth. And if you'd like to keep up to date with the podcast and everything else that's going on with Becoming Crew, including our gatherings, a new season coming in the autumn-winter. We've got an on-land weekend nature solo as well that we're hosting. All of that you can find on the Substack, and the best way to keep in touch with everything is to subscribe to the Substack, becomingcrew.substack.com. And if you're feeling really generous and up for supporting all of this work, you could flip to a paid subscription, perhaps. Anyway, thank you for listening. It's much appreciated. Look after yourselves out there. Keep re-entangling yourself with this mysterious living earth, this reconnecting ourselves back into the source of all creativity, the source of all life, this spaceship Earth. Until next time, peace and out.
This podcast is created in service to life, for you. It takes time, funds and energy to make. If you'd like to contribute to the running costs, you can donate the price of a cuppa or a pint. Find the link on our website. This podcast wouldn't exist without the following crew: Charlie Shred, Audio Jedi; Seaman Home Burgess, Engine Room; Willow Burgess, Jingles;